Story 1. I decided to go for a run 12 years ago. An intoxicated driver put me into an 11.5-day coma in the intensive care unit. I suffered a traumatic brain injury, a broken sternum, and other injuries. I haven't been able to taste or smell anything for over 12 years. I have poor short-term memory, balance issues, an inability to dream, and impaired pain perception. This incident disrupted my life and caused additional stress and heartache. The driver was on parole for armed robbery, so I received the bare minimum in insurance money, just a few $1,000s. That is long gone now. During my recovery, I created an album. If you're interested, the album 9FM by the artist 9FM features the music I made during that time. It's streaming everywhere. The first song is called At Deep Water. Enjoy. Story 2. When I was about 14, I realized the world was a difficult place with both evil and foolish individuals. Now that I'm in my mid-20s, I've come to see that the world is an incredible place, filled not only with evil and foolish people, but also with amazing and intelligent individuals everywhere you look. Part of maturing is recognizing the good alongside the bad and knowing when to contribute to the solution rather than the problem. Story 3. I was a little kid in 5th grade when my friend was taken away from our classroom by the police because her father had inappropriate pictures of her. He had been selling them and doing all sorts of terrible things to her. What kind of world are we living in where a parent does that to their own child? Adding to the horror of the whole Ryan White incident, even my relatives in Kokomo talked about how they didn't want him around them in public because his illness might affect them. I finally realized that we are living in a dreadful world. Story 4. After my mother overdosed when I was 16, having finally been clean, my grandfather, who had adopted me after I was abandoned, mocked me for keeping a photo of her in my room with some items. At the same time, my grandmother was exhibiting paranoid schizophrenia symptoms due to frontotemporal dementia, 2 years after my mother took her own life. My grandmother attempted suicide as well, and then 2 more times. I eventually fled because my grandfather wouldn't stop drinking, and my grandmother was dealing with many delusions. I was experiencing extreme post-traumatic stress disorder. I attended college on a full scholarship, but then my medication for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder was revoked. This caused my grades to crash from a 4.0 to a 1.9 because I couldn't manage the severe post-traumatic stress disorder I was experiencing, the new curriculum, and the loss of medication I had been taking since I was 8. That was just the beginning. Before I turned 18 years old, I had been struggling, but I finally got a vehicle and will graduate soon after 7 years. Story 5. During the pandemic, I really thought that people were better and that we would come together more effectively. Story 6. I found my friend dead from a drug overdose at 14 years old. Another friend took his own life, and my best friend went to prison for 20 years. I realized our difficult town destroys people's spirits. Story 7. I guess the world is a challenging place. When I look at my family, neighborhood, and city, it becomes less difficult because this is my world. These are the people and the environment that I can influence, even if only a little. I try to do so with my spirit, kind words, and a warm heart, and I am quite happy. Yes, the world and life can be very difficult, but there is a meaningful saying that goes, "Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." Story 8. When I was around 12 or 13, a woman known to the kids in my neighborhood was murdered by her boyfriend, and her body was found naked in a closet. Story 9. When I started becoming interested in history in college, I already knew that my background was troubling, and I had a suspicion that my country was equally flawed. However, learning history helped me understand that human beings have always faced challenges, which is why the world is in its current state. This has always been true, and as long as we exist, it likely always will be. Story 10. Not in isolation, but in the way the United States and the United Kingdom responded by causing war and suffering in territories that were not even responsible. Story 11. Watching The Keepers on Netflix, I stopped believing in God too. Those priests didn't fear God. Why should I? Story 12. When my dad died from brain cancer, it was very quick. His doctor had dismissed headaches for some time because, like many doctors, he considered pain to be normal. I quickly realized his brain cancer was a consequence of working with chemicals in the industry. It is truly a troubling world that poisons people and misleads them into thinking poisoning is normal. Story 13. When I got a job in the community and social services sector, I worked with the most at-risk traumatized children in my country. As I read the case notes about their experiences, I realized that the worst forms of physical and sexual abuse are more common than one might think, often perpetrated by family members or individuals in the community who groom children with substances. This made me understand that the world is not as pristine as the sheltered environment I grew up in. Story 14. When my brother died, life pushed me around like a bag. I was manipulated by people and relationships, which led me to a hospital due to the stress. Now, I just want to be left alone, to be honest. Story 15. When I was younger, I realized the world had a lot of evil in it. Around 2016, I understood just how bad it was in places I didn't expect and how it involved many people I didn't think would be. After that, I recognized just how far-reaching, deeply entrenched, and insidious it truly was. Story 16. My dad got sick, and I watched him deteriorate for 3 years before he died. The people at church told me it was for the best because God loved him so much that he brought him home early. What kind of loving God would do this to a child? I was only 10 when he died. Story 17. When individuals with limited education and little to no tangible value to society can earn millions on social media, while cancer researchers, teachers, and others who contribute significantly to society struggle to get by, it raises concerns about equity and value in our world. Story 18. When it was ingrained in me from childhood that a certain carpenter from Nazareth was the only way to God, it struck me that literally billions of people who have lived on Earth have never heard of him. Story 19. 9/11 and America's reaction to it. It still baffles me how no one in that administration is in jail after committing literal war crimes. Story 20. When I was 5 in kindergarten, I did not understand why no one else cared about climate change like I did. I still care about the environment and animals. Story 21. When I was in 2nd or 3rd grade and September 11th occurred, I felt a significant shift in energy within my entire class, possibly the whole school, as it played on our classroom television. I watched adults go from feeling safe to discussing the possibility of another attack. I grew up in an abusive household, but that was when I realized life isn't what it seemed. It was actually much scarier and more unpredictable. Story 22. Tiananmen Square. That was the first time I came to a true understanding of the world being a challenging place. Story 23. It has become evident in the past year, watching numerous video compilations of shoplifting and inappropriate behavior from police body cameras on social media platforms. There are many individuals acting inappropriately. Story 24. When the Civil War began in my country, I had to make difficult choices at the age of 17. I became what my younger self would consider horrible or evil, all for the sake of survival and keeping my family safe. Story 25. When I created a Reddit account, I realized how blissfully unaware we might be about the terrible things happening around the world without it. Story 26. When I read stories about immigrants in America and other countries like Canada, I reflect on their challenges and experiences. Story 27. When I was a little kid, my dad had a work party at a bowling alley an hour from our house. I brought my portable cassette player and handheld game console with me in the car. I had a case for the game console that held it and all my games. Someone smashed the back window of our car to steal my $40 portable cassette player but left the game case thinking it was full of cassettes. It was winter, so we had to drive home with no back window. Story 28. When someone introduced me to Richard's Realm at the age of 13, I clicked on it. I have never been able to thoroughly erase that experience. Story 29. When I realized that it all boils down to whose side you are on. Remember, if you don't pick one, one will be assigned to you. Story 30. I was playing pickup basketball, and one guy was on the verge of losing control over another player because he lost the rebound. There was no foul play. He just got outplayed and was ready to risk everything to protect his ego. When there are people like that in the world, I sometimes feel like we don't stand a chance. Story 31. When I was 11 or 12, my family went on a long road trip from North Carolina to Texas, and on the way, We stopped in Louisiana for Mardi Gras. I remember vividly going into the very small houses and trailers of these family friends I had never met, and it was almost forcibly festive. I had never seen anything like it. My family had always been quite religious. My mother, desperate for connection, went through different men and religions regularly. All that to say, I was heavily exposed to the standard concepts of God being good, that God loves all the children, and that if you are a good Christian, you will be blessed. While in Louisiana, I was introduced to a little girl, maybe 4 or 5, who was fighting stage 3 cancer. She was bald from the radiation and was obviously very tired from that constant barrage of healing. But this little girl was so sweet. Even as a middle school kid, I saw her positivity, strength, willpower, and a wisdom far beyond myself or even the adults praying for her recovery. She had lived a tortuous life in only half a decade and was still smiling throughout the festivities. We stayed for just a day and a half, then carried on to Texas, visited family for Easter, and made our way back to North Carolina without stopping in Louisiana on the return trip. During those hours in the car, I remember thinking about her condition. Why? When? How? She is only in pre-kindergarten. It didn't make sense to me. Sadly, it didn't matter why, what the reason was, or that her parents prayed, or that she was a good Christian child. It didn't matter that money was donated and well wishes were showered on her and her family. She died just before Christmas that year. Now that I am 34, I can't remember her name, but I have never forgotten her smile or the lesson that the world can be cruel. There is no God, and it is foolish to convince oneself otherwise. God obviously didn't love this child, or any of the other innocent and pure hearts suffering for that matter. Story 32. Between the ages of 18 and 30, from 2002 to 2014, I completed 6 deployments to Iraq and 2 to Afghanistan in the Marines, later working as a contractor. Over those 12 years, I believed I was serving my country by engaging in combat and witnessing my friends lose their lives. I thought my actions contributed to something greater than myself. However, I have come to a grim realization that all of it was to sustain the military-industrial complex, and none of it truly mattered beyond the bonds my comrades and I formed. I am still grappling with these feelings at 41 years old, while trying to live my life by serving others. Story 33. Watching adults complain about wanting justice and equality while engaging in endless political double standards reveals their hypocrisy. Story 34. 90% of people do not understand why others behave the way they do, whether due to natural human instincts or neurological wiring. This is not an excuse, but I observe people bullying others such as furries, fetishists, and those with different hobbies. It is ironic that a furry with a foot fetish faced justified backlash on YouTube for being racist, and many who responded to him used that incident as an opportunity to generalize and bully all furries. One furry reacted to him, not by bullying him for being a furry but for having a fetish. Humans naturally tend to dislike those who are different. However, we have evolved to embrace almost everyone in society, yet some individuals still allow their deep-seated hatred to surface. Story 35. When there are individuals struggling with addiction roaming the streets, my wonderful wife, who is in perfect health, continues to experience life-threatening seizures, and there is still no answer for it. Story 36. When I realized, long before Trump, the significant amount of harm the United States is responsible for without ever facing consequences for any of it. Story 37. Being on the internet in its early days and often talking to strangers aged 14 to 20 made me believe that every man was a pervert, a predator, or unfaithful. It didn't help that I had a friend who, at 17, was dating a married police officer. As a result, I sought out relationships with older men aged 18 to 25. I found it difficult to overcome this belief. In fact, I have never dated a man I felt comfortable having around my children. Consequently, my relationships did not last long, but I always prioritized my kids. Story 38. I attended an Episcopal school. A few years after I left, it was revealed that the priest had molested many boys with behavioral issues, as well as an 18-month-old baby, and one father-son combination. The father had been molested by the same priest in another parish and did not see anything wrong with sending his son to a school run by him. When the incidents came to light, pillars of the community, including the wealthiest individual, wrote letters of support, arguing that the priest had done a lot of good in the city. In reality, he had done nothing, and most of the students and faculty always found him creepy. He had taken one boy to a nearby city to meet a church official, probably a bishop, who also molested him. While it doesn't necessarily make it worse, it is important to note that he consistently preyed on boys with low self-confidence, even if they were the sons of prominent church supporters. In Youth Symphony, it was discovered that the conductor had molested several girls, ranging in age from 4 to 14. When one of the girls told her parents, they believed him instead of her. Then I went to a high school where one teacher was involved with female students. Beware, men, I say this as a man, and do not assume the community is protecting your children. Story 39. I used to have hope in American common sense laws, particularly regarding gun regulation. From the political party that boasts about common sense, you would think they would have some, but they do not. That worldview was shattered during the Sandy Hook incident, later in Uvalde, and thereafter during the Palestinian conflict. Children were supposed to be off limits. That was meant to be the one line no adult crossed. Yet to witness the aftermath of children murdered en masse and then harass the families of those deceased children, or to punish children and women for the acts of terrorists, viewing beheaded, bisected, and blown apart children and saying, they'll grow up to be terrorists anyway. That is sick and deranged. After these events, all of the empathy I had for the right evaporated along with those children. I do not wish anything upon them, but if something were to happen to them, I would not care. Story 40. At 5, someone was walking around my neighborhood asking all the children if they had accepted Jesus as their savior. Story 41. When I started watching real-life investigations and police videos about heinous crimes committed against innocent people. Story 42. When I realized people are so weak that instead of dealing with their own hurt and hatred, they try desperately to pass it on. They discover that it is not possible to rid themselves of it by being hateful to others. The only thing they have proven is that they surrendered and became the exact thing they hated, getting consumed by it until nothing is left of their inner being. They end up becoming a solid part of the very thing they try to avoid. Trying to share hatred, pain, and hurt does not alleviate their own pain, nor will it make others recognize the pain of the aggressor. The only effect is that people see them as weak individuals. They may be physically strong or project a false strong personality, but they remain fundamentally weak. The original mechanism of being hateful towards others was supposed to make those around them aware that they are hurting, serving as an invitation to intervene and help the aggressor. Instead, it became a temporary fix to feel a fleeting sense of control, ultimately resulting in bad outcomes every time. Not only are such individuals weak, but they also fail to learn. Others confront their pain by denying it power over them. Even if they still live with it, it holds no power over them. They distance themselves from their pain, weakening it, and show kindness to others. They grow, they love, they become eternal. It is increasingly difficult to join the kind-hearted because when an aggressor sees one of them, it triggers a violent reaction. There is only one thing hateful people dislike more than themselves. Others, especially those who manage to live with their pain by denying it control. Being a survivor, not a victim, is kryptonite for aggressors. They feel emotional and sometimes even physical pain when observing someone deny pain any influence. Sometimes, you even have to feign pain to avoid being targeted by aggressors because you represent everything they will never become. You are their leader. Story 43. Depends on what you mean. I have realized the world was a cruel place since childhood, with cherished family members dying and being stuck in school all day despite barely learning anything. But that was just the beginning. What probably taught me the most about how troubled people are is history, and the fact that the patterns keep repeating with no one learning a single lesson from it. Even now, as the last people who still remember the Second World War are passing away, we are headed straight back into the same problems that started World War II in the first place, if we are not already there. What opened my eyes to that was the unnecessary panic politicians and the media created around COVID-19 just to drive people into fear and away from challenging their problematic plans. Story 44. When they canceled Spider-Man Unlimited after only one season, It has been almost 30 years, and I'm still upset. Story 45. When I joined the Navy immediately after high school, I began traveling to different locations for various purposes. Story 46. My family members started dying very close together in various ways. My dad had a heart attack less than 6 hours after being told at a checkup that he was the healthiest patient so far that day. My brother beat leukemia, only to die in a car accident when a drunk driver hit the vehicle they were in. My sister overdosed. I wasn't close to her, but my other sister may also be dead. The police won't report her missing because she has a history of running from them. My grandfather died from a broken heart, I think, less than a month after my dad. The only remaining family I have, besides my mother and an aunt whom I do not talk to, is a brother. He was released from prison last year, and I haven't spoken to him in over 8 months. I check on him occasionally, but he has no social media presence and is not listed in any jail or prison system. I'm not sure if he is alive, but I never checked the 4 or 5 times coroners had unidentified bodies that matched his description. White, mid-20s, slim and athletic with no tattoos. It's strange how our family lost contact with so many people. I hope they were eventually claimed and that I'm not the reason my brother was buried or cremated as an unidentified person. I ran away to escape abuse after my dad died, but his death showed me how cruel life can be. Story 47. When I view the world through a distorted lens, everything appears distorted. Upon introspection, I can uncover some troubling aspects within myself, but I can also discover positive traits. I designate a piece of land on Earth as my own. I fill a container with water and claim it as mine. I take resources from the planet and label them as mine. Subsequently, I may wage conflict against those who seek what I consider my resources. Story 48. When my father, after 40 years of marriage, straddled my sleeping mother in bed and shot her point blank in the face with a .44 Magnum, all because she didn't want him to drink anymore. Story 49. It is also amazing and beautiful. May you come to see through a lens of both and rather than either or. Story 50. When I tried to seek justice for my rape, the judge and police re-traumatized me. I wish I had never reported it. He ended up going free anyway. Story 51. At around the age of 10, I don't remember which incident came first, but there was a bomb threat at my school, and I got yelled at by security for panicking during the evacuation because I had been separated from my mom. There was also the incident of sexual abuse and the time my mom's friend violently murdered her stepchild, who rode my bus. It was one of those experiences. Story 52. It was always challenging. We just didn't know because the internet wasn't prevalent. Now it's a significant factor, and we learn about everything every day, with conditions continuing to deteriorate. Story 53. I don't really remember when I had the realization, but not being able to trust or rely on your parents, or even have a safe space with them, impacts you quickly. Story 54. I treated it like a bad place for me until recently. I looked at life as nothing but a burden I wished to be rid of. Now, I see the suffering in us all. The world aches for healing. Story 55. It came to our attention that the all-seeing eye produces all of our television programming and private media. This situation arose because intelligent individuals allowed Christians to erect this false idol called God. Story 56. When the United States wore black berets at the Olympic ceremony, I realized that we are the evil empire we were warned about. Story 57. All through college, I was an optimist who thought solving world hunger, homelessness, and disease was about bright people solving logistical problems. My job in international trade policy taught me that government does not have society's best interest in mind when negotiating policy. Even the unbiased United States government departments that regulate product safety standards to protect Americans are all too willing to compromise health and safety standards to serve a political agenda. On a related note, if Donald Trump did only one good thing in his whole political career, removing the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations would be it. I do not care if he did it only to oppose Barack Obama. I was intimately familiar with those negotiations and many drafts that never made it to the light of news media, and the world is better off without the United States having been a party to it. Story 58. Early in my life, the war in Vietnam was on television every night. I realized one day I would be expected to kill people I had never met because others I had never met were arguing. Seemed a bit unfair and wrong. I was in basic training when it finally ended. Story 59. When I read about near-death experiences, I often encounter individuals who thought similarly. They then experienced out-of-body or near-death experiences during traumatic events, and upon transitioning, they gained a profound understanding of how remarkably amazing this place is for us souls. It is, in fact, perfect within God's plan. However, it is beyond our tiny human comprehension and does not make sense within a single lifetime. In truth, it can seem cruel, but with countless lifetimes. Story 60. When I was a kid, my parents taught us that not everyone will be our friend or will always like us. As I grew older, I learned about violent crime and wars. I quickly realized that there are many great people in the world, but at the same time, there are also some troubled individuals. Story 61. When a man opened fire at a parade in the Chicago area, a young boy was shot and paralyzed. His mother reported that he asked her, "What will I do at recess?" This is just one example that comes to mind. Story 62. Being afraid of my father as far back as I can remember, it hit home for me when my grandfather died. I was 23 and my father called and said, "I know he was more of a father than I was, so I really hate this for you." It stopped there, an acknowledgement but no apology or attempt to build a relationship. It was the only human thing he has ever said to me, and it made me realize that some people can be fully aware of how unkind they are, acknowledge it even, and then not attempt to make amends or change. It is troubling that people like this exist and go through life knowing they are making others miserable and can be just fine with it. There are people for whom cruelty is not the point, but simply the default. Story 63. I experienced abuse from my mother's ex for several years, starting when I was 5 years old. My father was absent throughout my upbringing, and most of my family on both sides is either deceased or estranged. Recently, I discovered that my mother took several $100s from me while I was intoxicated. The lack of compassion and remorse from those who should have cared for me during my childhood has deeply affected my perception of humanity's direction. Story 64. Being treated harshly for things you cannot control is difficult. Imagine being born with certain traits or appearance and facing bullying and punishment for it. That is truly unfair. Story 65. I'm 18, and I believe the world isn't a terrible place. It is the actions of humans that make it seem so, with wickedness, viciousness, and arrogance. Story 66. Do everything you can to process, understand, and work to break that generational cycle. You are already susceptible to addiction, having no memory of ever not being on drugs. Seek professional help and make the effort to eventually be completely free from drugs. I am so sorry for your pain. No one deserves that. Find an outlet and turn it into art. Story 67. In high school, there was a popular student who nearly died in a drunk driving accident of his own making. It was a week of mourning at school, complete with a ceremony. Later that month, an unpopular student died in a motorcycle accident. The next morning, we received a brief announcement that a student had passed away, and that was all he received for remembrance. Story 68. I was reading newspapers at the age of 4 and watching the news every night. I witnessed the Vietnam War in 1968, Robert Kennedy's assassination, and other significant events before I turned 10. Story 69. When I was 10, Jonestown happened. I watched it on the news and read about it in the paper. I wondered, what am I inheriting here? Story 70. I've never seen the world as a troubled place. There's so much of it I haven't seen or even had feedback from a single human to base that assumption. Focusing on America, it's 2024, and I'm no teenager. Wasn't 4 years of witnessing a leader's failed promises, corruption, hateful rhetoric, mass chaos, and compulsive lies enough? In 2024, I realized America, not the world, is a very troubled place. I don't see fellow citizens as evil, but sadly, many are naive and easily misled. Story 71. History major in college. I am learning about the trajectory of human history and the darker aspects of human nature since the very beginning of our species, particularly since the agricultural revolution. Many people today have the misconception that the world is spiraling deeper into chaos and barbarism than ever before, but that is simply not true. The modern era is by far the most peaceful and prosperous time in human history. Yes, things are difficult today, but they have always been difficult, and generally speaking, conditions are better for more people today than ever before. Humanity is also just as amazing and inspiring as it is flawed, but that is another story. Story 72. Back in the 1990s, there was a woman in Europe who carried out a suicide bombing in a public place or place of commerce. I was a teenager at the time, saw the news on a plane, and it has stuck with me. Story 73. I think I was about 14 when the Watergate scandal hit the news. I then realized that my rosy view of my country was false and that politicians were not good people. That was the year I stopped caring about my grades. Story 74. The mean bullies win, and the nice people write angry letters and give big speeches but ultimately do nothing but talk. Story 75. When many people chose to listen to oil company public relations instead of scientists, it demonstrates a significant lack of critical thinking and a sense of shared responsibility that makes me believe we are in serious trouble. I feel like we are losing science, education, knowledge, and compassion, and in return, we are left with a rat race that makes us self-serving and ignorant. Story 76. Peter Sellers outlined in his 1970s philosophy paper, Famine, Affluence, and Morality, that people are inherently evil, and no one has been able to convincingly debunk his argument. Story 77. When I was on the internet at around 12 years old, someone told me to visit a website called phuckedup.com. I saw videos I shouldn't have seen at a young age, that's for sure. Story 78. I am a gay man. I cannot believe how the world, in general, treats gay people. All human sexuality is guided by the brain. There is no cognitive choice. I did not do anything wrong. It is stressful, daunting, and overwhelming, and society is relentless in its chastisement. It takes a lot of mental energy because society is so bigoted. Story 79. When have there not been very bad things happening? It was probably much worse in the past. People died much earlier and faced many more diseases. There have always been wars, and entire populations were wiped out and enslaved. However, there have always been and continue to be good people. Most individuals around the world love their families and want their children to thrive. I believe we still have a lot of growing up to do as a species, but even though there are many bad things, I am hopeful about the existence of good things as well. I hope we can eventually move away from needing war and violence as an answer. We are just not there yet. Story 80. To be honest, after smoking cannabis, it changed my perception of the world. It feels like nothing really matters. We exist without any purpose. To be honest, we just exist. Story 81. When I was 7 years old, some boys in my neighborhood chased me and beat me with sticks. One of them was my friend with whom I played every day, and the other was his friend who disliked me because I was a girl. I have a scar that stretches across the back of my leg. For what felt like the entire summer after that, anytime I saw them on their bikes, I would dive into the bushes and hide, sometimes for a long time. Story 82. When I first became the target of national defense agencies in Canada, I was so naive. I believed that they were doing it for the right reasons and that nobody could be that cruel, sadistic, and evil. As months, then years, and now almost a decade have passed by, I have come to realize that they are simply evil. The only reason they are doing it is because they love watching someone suffer at their hands. It brings them joy and happiness. You hear about these people who were targeted by their own spy agencies, and I can tell you, there is nothing in this country that could be more painful. It is the truest form of evil in this country, carried out by people who are completely desensitized to human suffering. They will destroy every aspect of your life and convince everyone, including yourself, that you deserve it. Truly evil on an epic scale. Story 83. I grew up in a very sheltered bubble. My parents shielded me from as much as they possibly could, only sharing certain things with me to demonstrate the importance of being careful. I knew there were bad people in the world who did bad things sometimes, but I thought it was rare and that most people are good and do good things. It felt like a real rainbows and sunshine kind of worldview. I thought conflicts like war were relics of the past and was completely clueless about the situations happening all around the world in real time while I sat in class learning about events that occurred over 100 years ago. I was unaware that my country had a role in many of those conflicts. It seems very naive to reflect on this as an adult, but I was only 11 when my first realization that the world is a difficult place occurred on September 11, 2001. I did not know what terrorism was, and I couldn't fathom why anyone would want to hurt so many people. The image of people falling from the towers was forever seared into my mind, and for the first time, my parents could not shield me from this reality. My bubble and everything I thought I knew about the world was shattered that day. I recognize how privileged I was to have a childhood where I did not have to experience death and violence firsthand. So many children in the world live and die through unimaginable horrors that no child should ever have to face. I just wish my parents had prepared me for the harsh realities of the world rather than sheltering me from them to the point where it was a complete shock when real life confronted me. My 11-year-old mind could not reconcile the world I thought I was living in and the world I was actually in. It felt like I had been misled, and I became a very anxious adolescent after that. Story 84. When people from the entertainment industry run for office, they often try to connect with those from poorer communities because they represent a larger voter base. However, it can be challenging to explain to them why these candidates may not be suitable for office. Story 85. When I was in my early 20s, I realized that many people struggle with mental health issues. Most individuals are hesitant to embrace self-love, and people often hurt one another for little or no logical reason. I experienced significant anxiety and trauma due to human interactions. While the world itself is fine, human behavior often complicates things. Story 86. After all of humanity's achievements, when billionaires exist while people still go hungry and unemployed, there is a poor excuse for a business model. When empathy becomes extinct, so does the human race. We deserve this. Story 87. Over the past year and most of this year, the more you understand the state of the world, politics, and the individuals who continue to support problematic leaders, the more you realize how challenging things have become. Story 88. I saw a video on a social media platform before they restricted violent content, featuring two individuals sneaking into a home of a man under the influence of medication, repeatedly punching his abdomen and face as he alternated between being unconscious and awake. It was disturbing, and I am pleased they removed that type of content. Story 89. When you see how many wealthy and famous individuals evade consequences for their actions, it is disturbing that we allow these reprehensible people to remain in protective custody while knowing they are likely to reoffend. This situation should warrant the death penalty. Story 90. The first time a man attempted to assault me, people said I should feel flattered. I was 9 years old. Story 91. When animals, children, and vulnerable adults are made victims in the name of depravity and profit, the human race has signed its own extinction accord if any semblance of justice exists. Spoiler alert, there isn't. Story 92. When I first came to America for a better life at 9 years old, I realized how hateful people could be towards a child. I want to call it racism, but that feels like an excuse. These people are simply evil. Story 93. When I was between 13 and 15, I heard stories about Abu Ghraib and Central Intelligence Agency black sites, with conservatives claiming that if you didn't agree that torturing innocent people was acceptable, then you weren't a patriot and should leave the country. It was then that I realized how truly bad the world could be. Story 94. When I was 4 or 5, the owner of a restaurant told my father, "That abomination can't eat here," in reference to me because I was mixed race. Story 95. When I wrote about my suicidal thoughts, self-harm, and emotional abuse I was enduring for an essay as a cry for help, my teacher read it but never got me help. Instead, she continued to get me in trouble and embarrassed me in front of the entire class all year. I was 13. Story 96. For the first time, I realized that my future was in my hands. I wondered how every decision I make affects how my life will turn out. Story 97. Around 2007, David Icke was touring and speaking about the global domination of the hidden reptilian agenda and the creatures controlling humans. Story 98. I think it might have been around age 4. I took all I was told, all I believed, and everything I had seen or heard, and tried to reconcile it into harmony. It didn't work, and I had a nervous breakdown of sorts for several weeks. Finally, one day, I quit trying to see the world as a beautiful place and just accepted it as it is. Story 99. I will go first. I used to think moving from Asia to Europe would make life easier, but now I know how hard it is there with all the taxes and weather conditions. In fact, I believe being American is worse. Story 100. Turn off the television and the internet. Take a walk. Visit your parents. Take your dog for a walk. Kiss your wife. Watch babies giggle. The world is a beautiful place. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.